All right, good morning. We're going to be starting section 5.5 today, where we get into what's called factoring. We saw a little bit about it in section 5.4 when we took out a common factor, but now we're going to be getting into what people think of more commonly when we think of factoring. Factoring is the opposite of foiling. Um, so you are used to going from left to right. So you are used to making the box and putting like the x minus 3 and the x plus 5 and then multiplying to get x squared, multiplying to get negative 3x, multiplying the 5 and the x here, and then multiplying the 5 and the negative 3 to get negative 15. And then what we would do is we would write out all of our terms, and then we would combine like terms. So the two middle terms are the ones that combine, and that's where that 2x comes from. So here's the x squared, here's the negative 15, and the two middle terms made the 2x. If we use the acronym FOIL, the first two terms made the x squared. The outsides and the insides, technically in this case, the outside 2 would be the 5x, and the inside 2 would be the negative 3x. So right now my outsides and insides are a little backwards, but it doesn't matter the order. And then the last two together made the negative 15. Factoring goes in the opposite direction. So now we're going to be starting with a problem that looks like this, and we want to write it in this form. So some things to notice is that these two numbers right here will multiply to give you this last term. Negative 3 times 5 is negative 15. But just like we kind of had up here, the outsides and the insides added up together make this middle term. So if we add the negative 3 and the 5, we get 2. So the idea is we want to find two numbers that are going to multiply to give you the last term, but then add to give you the middle term. So we're going to practice that a whole bunch. So this is kind of, again, another example. So just to help you see, if this is our starting point, we want two numbers that multiply to 5, and then they have to add to 6. So a 5 and a 1 multiply to 5, and then 5 and 1 add to 6. And it's, again, because the outsides and the insides together make the middle term, and these last two numbers make the last term. So they have to multiply to give you the last term and add to give you the middle term. And I have that written here again. So we're going to decide what two numbers multiply to give you the last term. So we're going to start there. So here's the last term in this example. We have to figure out two numbers that will multiply to give us 16. And that's a positive 16. So that means that both of our numbers either both need to be positive or both be negative. So for example, positive 8 times a positive 2 would make positive 16. But also a negative 8 times a negative 2 would make a positive 16. Some other options, we could have a 4 and a 4, or we could have a negative 4 and a negative 4, or we could have a 16 and a 1, or a negative 16 and a negative 1. Are those all the things that multiply to positive 16? Just kind of make sure of that. Now what we want to do is we want to find the combination here that adds to give us the middle term. So they need to add to give us 10. So down here, negative 16 plus negative 1, that's negative 17. not 10. 16 and 1 add to 17, not 10. Negative 4 plus negative 4 adds to negative 8, not 10. 4 plus 4 would be 8, that's no good. Negative 8 plus negative 2 is negative 10. Here's the one, the only one that adds to 10. Only one of these is going to work. So to write it out, we're going to set up our two sets of parentheses. The thing that makes x squared would have to be an x times an x. And then the two numbers that we circled, a positive 8 and a positive 2, those are going to be written like this. And the order that you write these two terms in does not matter. What I mean is, I could have also written it as x plus 2, x plus 8. You know, if I put the second one first and the first second, that does not matter because we are multiplying, so we can multiply in any order. So we have one term being multiplied by a second term. The order that we write those in does not matter. So if you were to see this top one on the answer key, but you had the bottom one, just know that they're both good. Okay, let's go over to the next one. So we have to find two things that multiply to this last number. And again, that last number is positive, so they have to both be the same. They have to be the same sign. So let's list out all the things that multiply to 4. I could do a 2 and a 2, a negative 2 and a negative 2, a 4 and a 1, a negative 4 and a negative 1, and I think that's all my options. So now we need to look through that list, and we need to find the ones that add to negative 5. So 2 plus 2 is 4, that's not going to do it. These would add to negative 4, that's not going to do it. These add to 5, but we want negative 5. So this is my combination that adds to negative 5. And again, there's only going to be one that's going to work. Only one combination will work. So to get x squared, I need an x and an x. And then the combination that worked was a negative 4 and a negative 1. And again, it would be totally fine if I switched that order. So if I had said the negative 1 first and the negative 4 second, totally fine. Either one is okay. Okay, next one. Okay, and I'm going to try to keep with my color coding. So we're going to start with red. So I need two things that multiply to negative 18. Now it's a negative, so what that means is they are going to have different signs. I'm going to take a positive times a negative. So, for example, I could have a 6 and a negative 3. I could have a negative 6 and a positive 3. They have to be different signs in order to multiply to give you a negative number. What else? I could have a 9 and a negative 2, or a negative 9 and a positive 2. I could have an 18 and a negative 1, or a negative 18 and a positive 1. Let's see, anything else multiply to negative 18? Nope, I don't think so. So now we're going to go through the list, and we're going to find the combination that adds to negative 7. So these two add to positive 3, these two add to negative 3, these two add to 7, these add to negative 7. So those are the two numbers I'm going to use. So I'm going to write my two sets of parentheses. The two things that will multiply to x squared are x and x. And then I take my combination of numbers, the negative 9 and the positive 2. And that's my answer. And again, if you ever want to check your answers, you certainly can. So let's say we were going to multiply those together and we were going to do that box method that we've done in the past. Let's just make sure it all works out. So x times x was x squared, negative 9 times x, and then a 2 times x, and a 2 times negative 9. And if I write all of that out, and then combine my like terms, I should get the original problem. So these two combine to make a negative 7x, and then I've got that minus 18. And yep, that is the original problem. So I know I did it right. So you can check all of your answers this way if you wanted to. Okay, next one. I need two numbers that multiply to negative 8. Again, it's negative, so I need different signs. One has to be positive, one has to be negative. So I could do like a positive 4 and a negative 2, or a negative 4 and a positive 2. I could do an 8 and a negative 1, or a negative 8 and a positive 1. Those are all the things that multiply to negative 8. And now I need to find the one that adds to negative 2. So 4 plus negative 2 would be a positive 2. I want a negative 2. So that would be this one. Negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. So then again, I write my two sets of parentheses. X times x is what makes the x squared. And then my two numbers that I circled were a negative 4 and a positive 2. And that's my answer. For these ones, ignore the equals 0. Don't worry about that for right now. That will come into play when we start solving these things. So don't worry about the equals 0 for now. Just keep doing it the same way we've been doing all the other problems. So I need two numbers that multiply to 6. And it's a positive 6. So they're going to have the same sign. They'll either both be positive or both be negative. So two things that multiply to 6. So that could be a 2 times a 3. It could be a negative 2 times a negative 3. 6 times 1. Negative 6 times negative 1. Those are my only options. So I need to find the combination that adds to 5. So out of all of these options, the one that adds to 5 is this combination of 2 and 3. So I write my two sets of parentheses. X's go first. And then my two numbers that I chose were a positive 2 and a positive 3. And that's the answer. Okay, this one is number 6 is a little weird because we've got this number on the right side of the equal sign. So I would get everything onto one side. So I'm going to subtract the 56. There's nothing over on the right. On the left, I'm going to put all of my terms in order. So the x squared is going to go first, the negative x is going to go second, and then the negative 56 is going to go last. And just like this last problem, we're not going to worry about the equals 0 part. Again, that'll come into play later when we learn about solving. So, negative 56 is negative, so that means we're going to have different signs. That means one will be positive and one will be negative. So we need to think of two things that multiply to negative 56. So that could be a negative 7 and a positive 8. It could be a positive 7 and a negative 8. It could be a 56 and a negative 1, or a negative 56 and a positive 1. Or you could do a 14 and a negative 4, or a negative 14 and a positive 4. I think those are all the combinations that multiply to negative 56. We want the only combination that adds to a negative 1. Negative 1. So if I add these two, I get a positive 1. If I add these two, I get a negative 1. None of these other ones work. So that was a positive 7 and a negative 8. And that's the answer. Okay, this last one, when we find things that multiply to positive 8, positive means they're going to have the same sign. So both positives, like 4 and 2, or both negatives. I could do an 8 and a 1, or a negative 8 and a negative 1. That's it. That's all the combinations there are that multiply to 8. And I need to find the pair that adds to negative 2. These two would add to give 6. These two would add to give a negative 6. These two add to 9, and these two add to negative 9. None of them add up to negative 2. None of them add up to negative 2. So, unfortunately, what that means is that this does not factor. So, not everything factors. Not all quadratics factor. That's the downfall of factoring. Factoring is usually going to be the fastest way, but it does not always work. So we're going to have to teach you another method later that always works. Not everything factors. So there's going to be some that just won't work. Okay, so for the remainder of class, you've got a worksheet. And this worksheet I made up. It's like a puzzle that you're going to solve. It's a quote, a Harry Potter quote that you're going to do the problems, which will then get you a letter that you fill in the blank, and you'll get one of my favorite Harry Potter quotes. So that's your homework for tonight. Here, I'll write down that Harry Potter worksheet. Whoops, there. Okay, so work for the rest of the class and be good for the sub while I'm gone. Thanks.